The first season of the newest The Boys spin-off, Vought Rising, just ended, and wow, what a season of television it was. The way they used the characters of the present to introduce the past was unexpected, but made for... Hold on, sorry, I'm getting word that despite the egregious amount of Soldier Boy, that wasn't Vought Rising, but actually the final season of The Boys? No, that can't be right. There's no way the show would end on a season that bad, right? Oh my god, that was actually the final season. Why did they do that? What are we doing here, people? What went wrong? Not even a shockingly good finale could save the other 7 episodes of meandering before the end, as The Boys goes out with one of the strangest final seasons of television I've ever seen, but I guess that's what Clara would have wanted. Full spoilers for The Boys Season 5 in this video, by the way. I'm not even going to try and do a non-spoiler section because maybe I could save you from watching this season, but before we get into that, I think it's important to provide some context. For the last few years, I've had a very complicated relationship with The Boys, which sounds very weird out loud now that I've said it, but the show. I think that the first 3 seasons of The Boys are genuinely great and some of the best in the entire superhero genre as they balance satire with subversive storytelling and biting political commentary. Things took a drastic change for me during season 4, most notably towards the end, as The Boys embraced some of their worst writing tropes by leaning way too heavily into shock value and gore, which hurt the season a lot for me, especially with some blatant mischaracterization. But the thing about season 4 is that no matter how much I felt about the core of it, it ended with the promise of change. Those final 5 minutes set to Nirvana's heart-shaped box is some of the most exhilarating stuff we've ever seen from The Boys, as they set up a final season that's going to be electric and change the status quo as we know it. Homelander was effectively untouchable, as he was basically the shadow president. Butcher finally snapped and promised a scorched earth as he drove off with new powers and the virus in hand, while the rest of the boys were broken and taken by Vought. It seemed like this show was finally going to embrace real change as they put everything in place for a final season that was going to capitalize off this storytelling potential. So even with how frustrating that season was, those last few minutes won me over. And on top of all that, Gen V got me fully back in and invested in this universe again, as we got to see things on the small scale and spend time with these characters who were really interesting. So with all of that added context, we finally get to season 5 of The Boys, when they've done their work to get me excited to see how it all wraps up. And considering how much screen time he stole from other people this season, I think it's only fair that Soldier Boy of all characters gives you my review of this season.
You're a fucking disappointment.
Here's my little shameful confession to you all. I've never seen Game of Thrones. It's my one big cultural blind spot, but I imagine this is how it must have felt watching season 8 play out, as The Boys just spent the majority of its runtime throwing away its potential for a season that was completely underwhelming. Season 5 of The Boys played out like nobody told them it was the last one up until the finale, and apparently they forgot everything that happened beforehand because some of the characterization is so baffling and contrived, and the deep is still alive for the majority of it. Every single episode felt like it was trying to lead somewhere exciting, only for it to go absolutely nowhere. Plot threads and characters are introduced and written out on a whim, as it feels like every single episode belongs to a different season of television. The lack of consistency between episodes outside of one overarching V1 plot that feels utterly useless by episode 7 is baffling. I could not fathom how the writer's room thought this would be good pacing for the final season of your biggest show in the universe. It's almost like we're missing entire episodes between episodes, as sometimes an episode will end on this massive cliffhanger only for the next one to not even acknowledge it. But here's the thing, the craziest part is, the sense of urgency is gone for the vast majority of this season. Instead of knocking down all the dominoes they painstakingly spent the last 7 years building up, we're introducing new story beats that go nowhere and spending time dicking around doing classic The Boys adventures. It's the final season, guys. The time to do that is done. Now is the time for action. The status quo they set up in the season 4 finale that I was so excited to see is completely abandoned by the end of episode 1. Instead, we get a narrative that is shamelessly contrived with so much Vought Rising setup, it's disgusting. Who in their right mind thought it would be a good idea to tank your final season of television with plot threads that won't make sense for a year? Am I just going insane? Is one of the most basic lessons of screenwriting not show, don't tell? This season spends so much time telling us all the things Soldier Boy did in the past, as it impacts the future in ways that are downright diabolical, and I don't mean that in the way Butcher does. I mean in the sense that it is outrageous they played in all of our faces like that. It honestly had the opposite effect of what they were intending, as it hurt the final season so much I have little to no interest in ever watching Vought Rising now. Maybe it's gonna be a great show watching the origin of how Soldier Boy became racist. But after that season of television, you guys can keep it. Have your fun, I'm done. You know, I should probably talk more in depth about what actually happened this season, so here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna go through this season episode by episode to take you on the same journey I went through, processing the direction they were taking in real time. Let's obviously kick things off with episode 1 because, shockingly, I really love the opening to this season, as they came out swinging, dropping the Flight 37 video in the opening moments of the season. In hindsight, this was utterly wasted as they waved the entire thing away with AI, despite it being the biggest dagger hanging over Homelander's head, but at the time, I thought it was going to have a lasting impact across the season as it haunted the narrative. You could have done some really interesting stuff exploring propaganda through Flight 37 and how people were finally starting to wake up, but instead it's just one and done. But I can't stress enough that at the time, I thought this was going to be huge, especially because the new status quo this episode was exploring inside the concentration camps, and the forced reunion of the boys was very interesting. I didn't love the fact that Butcher was just buddy-buddy with everyone again, but it was clear that there was still some unresolved tension that gave me hope for the rest of the season. It was also really interesting to watch Homelander start to spiral out of control and kill people who so much as liked Starlight posts. It was clear that he was more unstable than ever, and I could not wait to see more of that going forward. And of course, you can't talk about this episode without mentioning A-Train, because his redemption was handled incredibly well and felt so organic with how they've been building up over the course of this series. Even now, after it's all said and done, watching him stand up to Homelander was my favorite moment this season, even more with how it felt like a true full circle moment with how he started out in the first episode of the series. They kicked things off in such an impressive way that pretty much all of my concerns were put to ease, and I had full faith in what they had to offer. Little did I know just how much they were going to play in my face. Episode 2 wasn't as good as they slowed the pacing and started to fall back into some old habits, but it had a lot of really important character moments that I was fine with it. The boys were actively struggling with working alongside Butcher again, and you felt that tension in every single scene. The virus plot was actually progressing. We had new soups introduced in Teenage Kicks that could have had a promising role. And you know, now that I think about it, that crow lady just never comes back. Watching her have that conversation with MM, it felt so obvious that she was just going to come back by the end and have a heroic moment, but no, she's just gone. I guess that was going to be Gen V Season 3 setup, but we can't have nice things. The big thing Episode 2 does, though, is bring back Soldier Boy, and at the time, I was looking forward to that because he was really fun in Season 3, and you could do some interesting stuff with his reaction to the virus and how things have progressed while he's been on ice. Instead, we get Episode 3, because this is where things start to take a turn for me. That's not to say it was bad, because I think it was pretty good, but for a final season, they still weren't ramping up and were making bizarre choices in the narrative. I did like the inclusion of Translucent Sun, though. That felt very full circle from how Season 1 began, and was a great way to kind of tie that all together, along with Homelander becoming God in one of the most insane scenes in this entire show, which says a lot, and honestly should have been even more out there if the real world wasn't hell, and our own fascist dictator didn't do that the same week. But it was a great direction for his character, as the man who has all the power in the world still wants more. But, unfortunately, that all leads to the quest for Vive 1, and starts what will be the beginning of several fetch quests that go nowhere important through the entire season. And if that's not enough, the virus plot starts running in circles and wasting our time, as it also goes nowhere important. At least Stan Edgar is brought back to be a brief plot device, but he has barely any impact on the rest of the season that it kind of feels pointless. Then there's the big moment that ends this episode as Homelander turns on Ryan and writes him out of the season until the finale, which is insane considering he should have been the key to all of this. Even at the time, I thought Homelander beating him down that bad was a poor choice because it was clear to me they didn't know what to do with Ryan, so they just got rid of him. Back when this show started, it seemed like Ryan was going to become the most important character in this show, so to see him become an afterthought was very disappointing. Don't you worry though, because things can and will get worse from here, as episode 4 was by far my least favorite of the entire season, and when I really started to get frustrated with the pacing as they kept going in circles. Not even an incredible Mambo No. 5 needle drop could save this utter nothing burger of an episode that comes at the halfway point of the season and almost feels like a filler episode. And listen, I got nothing against filler episodes. I still love episode 5 of Born Again, as these episodes can be a great way to flesh out the world and give these characters more depth. But this was the midway point of your final season of television, and it felt like nothing important was accomplished that justified this taking up a whole episode, as they doubled down on the problems I was starting to develop with the direction the season was taking. Most notably, the fact that the boys are just working together again, and this episode is used to resolve their tensions for some reason and bring us back to the status quo. All that happens is they just get angry at each other due to the toxoplasmosis, say some things they already knew about each other, and come out of it stronger than ever. What happened to the promise of Butcher snapping and turning his back on the boys? It feels like all that characterization they built up over the course of Season 4 was just thrown away to do more classic boys shenanigans. And why are we doing the same thing we did for the past 4 previous seasons? They were actively regressing Butcher's character by taking him this direction and making the rest of the boys look bad in comparison as they welcome him with open arms, especially Hughie. That betrayal should have been a turning point for his character that just never came. And don't even get me started on the fact that this episode starts the forced Vought Rising tie-ins as Soldier Boy's old doctor is there, so that carries no weight because we don't have any attachment to him. And on top of all that, it brings us the beginning of this baffling Soldier Boy and Homelander pairing that never does anything interesting because Soldier Boy can't make up his goddamn mind long enough to stick to something. And while I'm already complaining this much, they randomly introduce a new weakness for Homelander out of nowhere 5 seasons in that they never really circle back around to, and then the boys waste their chance to kill him. The only redeeming thing about this episode was Starlight's side plot as she returns home and visits her father again, exploring the effects of propaganda on the small scale. I really enjoyed that as it felt like the boys at its best when they are telling these stories that parallel what's happening in the real world, but it's not so in your face that the political commentary becomes cartoonish like it so often does in this season. If we had gotten them exploring propaganda more and how to deconstruct it, and less Vought Rising, this season could have been something special and timely. But nope, we gotta burn the final season of the show to set up another show. It is so beyond frustrating, but thankfully, episode 5 was a step in the right direction. Unfortunately, it is placed horribly in the season. We are now past the halfway point of this season. You have got to get the momentum moving, but instead we get an episode that feels like it should have been the second one of the season. If it came earlier, this would have been a great way to flesh out characters we don't get enough time with. But instead, it comes right when the stakes need to pick up as it brings the story to a screeching halt. It's a shame too because I really like the structure of this episode, breaking things off to let us see what these characters get up to, but it does not hit the same when we are this deep into the season. The firecracker stuff is interesting as she is forced to abandon the thing she cares most about, her faith, to secure her spot, and that ultimately leading to her downfall. But the thing is, as interesting as that idea is, the sympathy didn't feel earned. Did everybody just forget that she's a pedophile? Why did Annie, of all characters, feel bad for learning that she died when she made her life a living hell last season? It is such a weird inconsistency and tonal dissonance I couldn't get behind. Her death is genuinely shocking too, but it doesn't do anything for the overarching season itself. And to an extent, that's fine, because I do like the idea that Firecracker died for nothing. I just wish that everything interesting she had to do this season didn't come in one single episode. I'm not even going to talk about the terror stuff because just thinking about that gives me a headache, but Noir's story was definitely my favorite this episode. I really liked seeing what he did out of the costume. And while Noir's writing is very inconsistent this season as they kind of forgot all of his powers and his narcolepsy, seeing that disconnect with how he treats being Black Noir like an actual job while he wants to pursue his true dream of being on the stage is very compelling. But apparently, like everything this season, with everything good must come something bad, as we also get the Soldier Boy plot of the episode, which was by far my least favorite. Right off the bat, I have never seen Supernatural. There's just way too many episodes that it's very overwhelming for me to think about. So if this little reunion side plot they had going worked for you, I'm happy for you. I could not care less about a supernatural reunion when we should be advancing the plot instead of just spinning our wheels for some cameos that are admittedly fun, but that doesn't justify what they did to this season. They basically just took a whole episode to drag out that bomb site reveal and make this fetch quest feel even longer than it needed to be when it could have just been an email. And all of that comes to a head in episode 6, which is a good episode in a bubble, but in the grand scheme of things, it continued to annoy me. I've been very negative, so let me talk about something I like this episode. Homelander's conversation with the Legend is the single best written scene this entire season. It was so compelling watching Homelander talk to someone who wasn't afraid of him as he gets this advice from a guy who talks to him like a normal human being. Anthony Starr's performance in that interaction is great and gives us a whole new look into Homelander's mindset that I wish we got more of this season. But instead, we gotta keep setting up Vought Rising, and this episode is the most egregious example of all that. Please, God, stop with all the Vought Rising stuff. I've been given no reason to care about Bombsight. I've been given no reason to care about these other characters who are only going to appear in that show. And the worst part is, these episodes don't do a good job of giving us a reason to care. They assume that we're going to find retroactive enjoyment in it when Vought Rising comes out, as they basically turn that into mandatory homework to better enjoy the final season of their show. That is just a crazy bet to see them hinge the entire season on. All of this stuff feels so ham-fisted in there, and it's not made any better by Soldier Boy not being able to stay consistent for more than 5 minutes. How many turns is this guy going to have, guys? Please. In this single episode, he switches sides like 3 separate times until he just gives Homelander the V1 because it's what Clara would have wanted, and that felt like a kick in the balls to me as a viewer. This is the biggest moment of the season and everything they've been building up to as Homelander achieves immortality, and it comes off so underwhelming because of how poor the setup was to get here. Everything they're doing with Soldier Boy, Homelander, even Sister Sage, it all feels so contrived and doesn't feel earned when that moment happens. It is an absurd decision to have the motivation revolving around this big moment be a relationship relationship that happened entirely off screen with no build up to this point. God, it is so frustrating to talk about. I need to focus on something else. I really didn't like the stuff with the Deep and Black Noir this season. I don't mind the idea of them having this little petty rivalry going back and forth as it escalates with each new episode, but the way they dispose of Black Noir pissed me off. You're telling me the Deep is able to just strangle this guy with a podcasting microphone wire and stab him once, then that's it? Did they just forget that Noir can fly or is a lot stronger and more durable than that? If you wanted to have him die in an underwhelming way, you could have at least brought back the narcolepsy they conveniently forgot about and had the Deep strangle him when he passes out. That could have been something, but instead I just felt like they wasted Black Noir's character this season all in service of the Deep. As for episode 7, let me start with this. The Deep stuff this episode is genuinely good. This was when it all kind of clicked for me, and the Deep went from being a character I couldn't stand this season to someone I finally understood as the direction for his character became very clear. It just should have been happening like 3 episodes ago. I really like the idea of seeing him go out sad as both the Soups and the Fish want nothing to do with him, to the point where he can't even go save a guy who's drowning and looks like a big fraud. That's great. I just wish this century of humiliation was happening the entire season rather than watching him mess around with Black Noir for nothing. This season was already contrived enough. You're telling me you couldn't come up with a different reason for the Deep to get kicked out of the 7? I feel like you could have done something really interesting with the Deep hesitating to kill A-Train in that opening episode, and that's what gets him kicked out of the 7 as Homelander isn't tolerating any weakness. Then from there you can do your stuff with Noir to have the Deep compete with him to win over Homelander's approval again. But he should have been humiliated longer than just episodes 6, 7, and 8. As for the rest of this big penultimate episode of the season, which has no sense of urgency and no meaningful stakes, Homelander has finally taken the V1, but he's no different after getting it, and we don't even get to see the results of the cliffhanger from last episode. Don't get me wrong, I love a good musical number, and Oh Fathers was genuinely great, but you couldn't just cut back to that field and show Butcher and the gang getting away from Homelander as a fun little subversive opening? I guess the president dies by his hand, so that's something, but that's a complete afterthought as we don't even get to properly explore the ramifications of Homelander killing the president. Then, Soldier Boy is just casually written out after ruining the entire season? You're telling me all of that Vought Rising stuff was for nothing besides shameless self-promotion, and there was no payoff in the finale? The fact that he could just choke him out and they don't use this as an opportunity to showcase how much better V1 makes him is crazy. Soldier Boy doesn't even try to put up a fight. Is that what Clara would have wanted too? Come on, guys, you should be doing better than this. I'm already not loving this, but at least we finally had the return of the Gen V kids to look forward to. For what, all of 2 seconds before they're immediately turned away? To manufacture drama and give the writers an excuse to not include them because they'd probably solve every problem in 5 minutes? That really got under my skin as they were playing with our expectations and basically included them as a formality, which is insulting when this episode has time for Dognot and She-Line sniffing each other's butts. So that's not fun, and neither is the fact that they randomly throw in these new plot details out of nowhere as the boys are experimenting on Kimiko to make her like Soldier Boy to be able to absorb Homelander's powers. Why not just keep Soldier Boy around for that instead of writing him out? Instead, they just say the boys can do that now, and it feels like this should have been the thing we've been building up to the entire season, not thrown in haphazardly in the penultimate episode. Seeing the boys get this monumental of an advantage doesn't feel earned because there was no build up to get there. And they try and manufacture some stakes for it as they kill off Frenchie, but sadly, his death holds no weight because it just kind of happens. I will say, he does easily get the best line of the season when he tells Homelander, "I bet you never danced a day in your life." That is a beautifully poignant line that sums up how Homelander overlooks the small joys in life for power. But that moment was undercut for me as we don't even get to properly see how Frenchie dies. The way this scene is edited is so weird because the first time I watched it, I thought it was just him dying due to the radiation, but then he's bleeding out on the ground, and it's only in behind the scenes set photos that we find out Homelander fingered him to death. Not in that sense, but in the sense that he poked his stomach. This is a core character of your cast, and I don't care if he hasn't had much to do this season. If you're gonna kill him off, you need to show him dying. Instead, Frenchie was just on the back burner so much that I didn't feel anything when he died, which is insane because I loved him and Kimiko together so much this entire show. If you go back and watch my last video on season 4, I am glazing the both of them like crazy. To give them some credit, the Kessler cameo was fun, and I think it was a very interesting scene as he basically outed all of Butcher's secrets to Hughie, but the only reason that scene exists is so they can get Hughie to not trust Butcher again after they threw away everything that happened at the end of season 4. But at least, after all of that, we finally get to the finale, the last episode of The Boys ever. Going into this, I had zero expectations. The entire season was so disappointing to me that I was just hoping they managed to somehow pull out a miracle and stick the landing, but I felt so indifferent pressing play on that episode. Still, I set my alarm for 3 a.m. just to watch this finale live to avoid being spoiled, which makes the next words I'm about to say even more surprising, but I thought this episode was shockingly good, which makes me wonder, why weren't we doing this the entire time? Maybe it's just because my expectations were so low, or maybe it's the fact that nearly everything that came before this was incompetent, or maybe it's the fact that I was incredibly sleep deprived when watching it. It mostly worked for me. This episode doesn't even come close to making up for the rest of the season, but it's nice to know that the finale, on its own, was satisfying. Hi, this is editing me from the future now. I'm gonna be honest with you, when I finished that finale, I thought it was good, but the more I've talked about it, the more I've kind of soured myself on it, seeing all of the missed potential. It's a real bummer. My biggest complaint, though, is just that it feels like the finale was ripped from a better season of television where these moments would have had a stronger payoff. I could see a world where all of this lands better with proper setup to get there, but placed in this season, it just isn't as good as it should have been. Let's start with Homelander, because after 5 long seasons of waiting for it to happen, he finally dies. I was hoping something like this happened back in season 3, so this was incredibly vindicating, finally watching it happen. And you know what? I'll give them their credit. This was the perfect way for Homelander to die. Well, like the Butcher stuff was. Sadly, I don't think they really earned Kimiko depowering him, as they introduced it way too late in the season, and the idea of her doing it through the power of love, while sweet, feels very tonally out of character for this season, and with more build-up, they could have made that moment hit harder. But for Homelander's death itself and everything that happens after him being depowered, that was perfect. I loved seeing him as this sniveling coward without his abilities. He always was one, but he used those powers as a shield and had no real strength outside of fear and intimidation, being the biggest fish in this small pond. Once the power dynamic shifts, it becomes so satisfying watching him beg for his life like the cockroach he is, and even better that the rest of the world is watching it happen. Antony's performance in this scene is really great too, as his entire body language shifts and we see Homelander more pathetic than ever. It wouldn't have been enough to just see the boys get so powerful they can finally stand up to Homelander and kill him at his level. No, if you're gonna kill Homelander, it's important to expose him for the pathetic fraud that he is, and this finale understood that and gave us that satisfying moment of Homelander losing everything before finally dying. I even like that Butcher was the one to do it. Throughout this entire season, it felt like they hadn't properly built anyone up to kill Homelander, but this episode does a really good job finally refocusing things on their rivalry, so when Butcher lays that crowbar right into his head, it feels right. And because they finally remembered how to write well for once, that continues to make Butcher more interesting as he finally gets to kill Homelander, but it still isn't enough for him. While I really like his final confrontation with Hughie and how personal those stakes were, I will say that how we get there is pure writing incompetence. Could you imagine if this moment came after an entire season of Butcher in that same headspace we saw at the end of season 4 when he actually went off the deep end? Instead, he's just back to the same old Butcher up until this moment right here when Terror dies for plot reasons, I guess? And that was the last straw for him as he had nothing left. It's one of those ideas that on paper it works, but in execution, it feels so rushed. Like, what do you mean he just dies? You're not even gonna give a reason? It just happens so you can have him snap again? It's so convenient and completely undermines what should have been an impactful turn that happened much earlier in the season. Thankfully, I do think Karl Urban and Jack Quaid were able to salvage it, giving some really great performances in that final confrontation with each other as we get to see how far Hughie's come. In season 1, he was deathly afraid of everything happening in the world around him, but now he's grown into this leader who's able to make the hard decisions. I really like that Hughie was the one who was finally able to put away Butcher. I just wish that moment came with some better build-up throughout the entire season, really stressing the tension of that relationship. That's not the only important death this episode though, as the Deep finally dies. Thank God! I had been preying on his downfall the entire season to the point where this might have been more satisfying than Homelander for me. It honestly probably could have and should have happened sooner, but I love that he died the most pathetic death possible. He comes crawling back to Homelander begging for another opportunity, only for Starlight to immediately humble him and kick him into the ocean to die at the tentacles of his own fish people that he turned his back on in quest for more power. It was exactly what A-Train said would happen in the start of this season and feels like the only way the Deep story could have ended. I am especially glad that Starlight got to have a hand in it after how much he traumatized her in that first season. That was a very rewarding moment watching her finally get that lick back, even if it is kind of strange that she brought him to the beach, considering she knows that's where he'd be most powerful, but whatever. It got him killed, and that's all I care about. And that's pretty much it. The boys ended with a pretty good finale that didn't hit as hard as it could because of 7 very messy episodes that came before it, but I do really like the endings each character got. So at the risk of this video becoming even longer and watching me become even more agitated, I want to break down the important characters this season and talk about them a little more in depth. I want to start with Homelander because I feel like he was the most interesting character this season. First off, I need to give Anthony Starr some immense props for basically carrying this entire season on his back. He is doing some of his best work in this final season, and that's saying a lot because through all of the ups and downs of the boys, Anthony Starr has given a generational performance as Homelander for the last 7 years. He took a character that could have been very one-note and out there and managed to ground him in realism and make him feel like a genuine threat. I'm genuinely going to miss seeing what unholy thing they had him doing every single week. His character work is going down in the history books. As for the direction they took his character, I really like the idea of Homelander being deluded into thinking he's God. It just feels like the natural next step for someone who has amassed all of this power, wanting even more and trying to basically trick the world into thinking he's a higher power. It's a great way to show how far Homelander has come, as he's this character who desperately craves validation so much to the point where he's willing to push people away if it means he can get it from even more people. But while his characterization might be great this season, the narrative really fails him because of the wasted time that came with the V1 story. Especially considering that V1 Homelander doesn't seem any different from regular Homelander. You'd think that once he finally becomes immortal, there would be some kind of consequences and he would be moving differently. But nope, you start episode 7 and if you hadn't seen the previous one, you'd have no clue he took V1 because it's just business as usual. If you wanted things to be the same, at least do some kind of story where Homelander isn't acting differently because even with all this power, he still craves validation from Soldier Boy or something instead of that dead end. I think that the single biggest missed opportunity is that we never got to see Homelander truly snap during The Boys. It's honestly crazy to think that Noir, of all people, kills more living beings than Homelander this season. They spent nearly 5 seasons building up Homelander as this unstoppable threat who's been holding back the entire time. And if you're going into the finale, he needs to unleash a scorched earth like promised. It really doesn't help that they set up the expectations that Homelander would be doing the worst thing he's done in this season, only for that to just not happen. Unless they're counting him killing Timu Elon Musk, which I don't think anyone felt bad about. There needed to be a moment this finale where humanity didn't accept him as God, and we should have seen him laser literally everybody. I still can't fathom it. He was talking about let's light this candle when threatening Starlight over Flight 37, only for the whole thing to be hand-waved away and not brought up again the entire season. The release of the Flight 37 footage should have set him on the warpath the entire season instead of him being so muzzled and nerfed up until the finale. I really love the idea of Homelander losing his powers and going out as pathetic as possible. It works so well. But it would have hit even harder if there was a greater contrast of the boys finding a way to stop his rampage, maybe using the Gen V kids for once, and exposing how weak he actually is in reality when he doesn't have those powers. It's unsatisfying for his character as they don't let him have that moment, and as a viewer, you're left wondering why they spent so much time building up to that if they're not even gonna show it. There is so much missed potential with it this season, and I think it's because they had to draw out Homelander's death until the finale, when it should have happened halfway through the season, only for Butcher to then take over as the main antagonist, but they were too scared to do that for some reason despite Butcher being the opposite extreme end of Homelander. So on that note, we might as well talk about Butcher and the wasted potential of him not becoming a villain for longer than 5 minutes. They spent the entirety of season 4 building up to that turn at the end, all that drama with imaginary Joe Kessler being in his head acting as the devil on his shoulders, only for him to kill Victoria Newman and snap as he basically turned his back on the boys and became the very thing he swore to destroy and ruined everything. The ending of that season had him leave with the virus in hand and sinister intentions, but instead of getting any of that chaos promised to us, he just links up with the boys again like nothing ever happened. I'm probably repeating myself, but it bears emphasis. What are we doing here? Why in God's name are they so scared to let Butcher grow into the opposite extreme of Homelander he's destined to be as he tries to look for a soup genocide? Karl Urban is so good at playing the most sadistic version of Butcher, and it makes me frustrated beyond belief that they never let him fully embrace that, as he always just kept reverting back to season 2 Butcher every single time. I've got my fill of him saying, "Oi, Hughie," for 4 seasons. I don't need any more of that, guys. I'm very glad they at least kind of did it in the finale and Hughie got to be the one to off him, but he really needed to be an antagonist for longer, as it feels like the entire show was building up to that point only to not commit to it. This season would have been so much better if they just held up their end of the bargain and had Butcher working on his own until finally colliding with the boys in the White House as they kill Homelander, then setting him up to be the villain for the rest of the season. Ugh. Thankfully, for Butcher's sake, he wasn't the most annoyingly written character this season, as Soldier Boy exists, and his inclusion was completely pointless. They literally just defrost him to promote his show and then put him back on ice. That is egregious. You've got the audacity to waste my time like that in the final season of your show. What are you thinking? Making him the main character of this season instead of a plot device like last time was their first mistake, but I still can't get over the fact that he's just not in the finale, and there's no payoff to all this. Who thought that was a good idea? And it's made even worse worse considering that they are utterly wasting Jensen Ackles' talents. He is too charismatic for them to have writing so repetitive as he says the same exact joke every single episode, just swap out a new celebrity. As boring as that might be, I will take that any day over him being so annoyingly indecisive. He can't make up his mind. Every single episode he swapped sides, and it got more frustrating with each new time he did it. It's barely like he had a character arc this season, as he just did what the plot needed him to do, with no rhyme or reason for it whatsoever. Him being so stubborn in season 3 was an important part of his character. Why is he changing his mind at the drop of a hat now? What happened to the soldier boy everybody loved during season 3 that changed him so bad? What did they do to him in that cryo tank? The most insulting part of this whole thing is trying to make us believe he had this long-lost love with Stormfront of all characters. First of all, it is completely meaningless because we haven't seen it, and they didn't even foreshadow it during season 3. He mentioned her one time, saying that he knew her as Liberty back then. Secondly, during season 3, his entire motivation revolved around his romance with Crimson Countess, as he had this emotional bond with her when she left him for dead. And now I'm supposed to believe he had another love of his life that he just conveniently never mentioned? Come on, guys, I don't mind a retcon, but at least make it make sense, and don't force it in there for the sake of a narrative that doesn't even have a satisfying payoff. It's what Clara would have wanted. Give me a break. Why am I supposed to care about what the Nazi would have wanted? It's not even painted like a tragic moment because we don't even get to explore the ramifications of it for Soldier Boy because they lock him away. I can't believe they found a way to make me sick of Soldier Boy. If I never saw him again in my life, it would be too soon. Okay, I gotta calm down. Who's next? Give me someone less aggravating to talk about. Hughie? Okay, I can do that. Because honestly, I wish I had more to say about Hughie this season because he's basically a non-factor up until the finale. For the first half of the season, they manufacture unnecessary drama between him and Starlight, and then once that gets resolved, he basically just coasts up until the end. And that was maybe the biggest disappointment of the season for me, because Hughie basically acts as the heart of the boys, so it's disparaging to see him not get to do much in the final season. Even more so considering that I really didn't like what they did with him last season, and none of that trauma they put him through is mentioned here in any meaningful way. They just kind of brush past it. I hate to keep harping on this, but we really should have had more drama between him and Butcher, as their bond has been broken, not more of the same between them up until the finale. If it were up to me, this season would be more explicitly about testing Hughie's character in a story about trying to stay good in a world that rewards evil. That would have been a really great way to utilize him and test if he cracks under the pressure of trying to kill Homelander and then Butcher, only to have him come out of it stronger and show that the indomitable will of the human spirit always wins out at the end of the day, and give us some more hope in this incredibly bleak universe. Or fulfill the prophecy and have him learn spin jitsu, I don't know. He does get to be more of a fearless leader this season, which is nice and I do appreciate, but he never gets to do it in any meaningful way up until the finale. And granted, I do like his ending that he got to open up his own video store, finally returning back to his normal life, a much happier person after putting all of that behind him. I just wish he got more to do before we said goodbye to Hughie for good. As for his better half, Starlight, Annie has been maybe the most mischaracterized person this entire show for the last 2 seasons now. It started last season with her being so dismissive of Hughie's assaults, and now in this season she is weirdly cold. I don't mind the idea of her feeling hopeless. I think it's interesting with the status quo of the season and how hopeless things actually are, but it's too much, too fast without enough setup or payoff. Maybe I'd be able to accept it more if we hadn't just seen her acting normally in Gen V, only for this jarring character change in the final season. And don't even get me started on how callous she is to the Gen V kids for no reason, contradicting all that stuff they did over there. But on top of all that, they also nerf her like crazy. It feels like she loses every single fight she's in this season, even getting folded by someone like Oh Father. That being said, there is some interesting stuff they do with her and Oh Father that I wish we got a lot more of. Honestly, as a whole, Oh Father was a character I really enjoyed this season, a lot more than I expected to. He was elevated a lot by Daveed Diggs' performance, breathing so much life into this character and actually making him something. So much so that I literally just remembered while editing that he was confirmed to be a pedophile earlier on in the show. So, good job Daveed covering all that up with a great performance, but I'm glad he's dead. I even liked his backstory with his disillusionment from traditional religion, which makes it even crazier that he didn't have more to do with Starlight considering how much religion was a big theme of this season. That dynamic should have played a much bigger role as the both of them stepped away from their religion and found something else to help guide them. There was something interesting there, and I think that if Oh Father was more of Starlight's main antagonist this season, that could have been great, but instead we just get one interaction between them that doesn't really go anywhere. Even the exploration of propaganda and the Starlighters isn't given enough time, as it's all done in one single episode. That is when the show is at its strongest, as they're firing on all cylinders, but sorry, I guess we can't do more of that stuff to make the show so special in the first place because we got another show to set up. Thank God she was at least partially responsible for the Deep's death and wasn't a complete bum this season, and I do really like the fact that the Deep still had this burning hatred for Starlight while she didn't think about him at all. It was a great way to show how far she's come in contrast to him staying so stagnant. It just sucks that as that episode ends, Starlight doesn't really get her own ending. She's more so just a part of Hughie's ending, which I feel like was a real missed opportunity. You just needed one more scene of Annie doing something for herself. Maybe like starting a support group for victims of sexual assault, just to show that she has more of a unique ending of her own. Okay, let's take a quick positivity break for my own sanity right now. I love everything they did with A-Train this season. He's only in one episode, but they make it count, as his arc was handled perfectly. Everything from calling out the Deep for being spineless, to sacrificing himself to get the boys out of the camp, it is exactly what I would have done to make his turn matter. And the parallel from the beginning of this show, as A-Train saves Hughie's life and dodges the person when running, is beautiful. Everything about it feels so earned, and is honestly my favorite character ending for anyone in this show. I especially love that his final words for Homelander mirror exactly what happens to him in the finale.
Take away these powers, and what are you, huh? Pathetic, weak, sniveling fucking loser.
That is just beautiful karmic justice. And that's pretty much all the good things I have to say, so let's now go from the most positive to the most negative part of this season. I hate what they did with Kimiko. I cannot believe they pulled that kind of stunt and basically assassinated her character for jokes. Up until this point, she was my favorite character in the show, so you're gonna have to excuse the extra anger here, but I cannot believe how poorly they wrote her. Whoever in the writer's room thought it would be a good idea to make her so porn-brained needs to be shot out of a cannon into the sun. Kimiko, finally speaking, was the most powerful thing they did with her last season, and it's all thrown away for off-screen development. We don't even get to see her learn to talk again and try and reintegrate herself with these people, as she just talks completely normally and says the most crude thing possible every 5 minutes. And I get they explain that she learned to talk from TikTok and the internet, but it's a bad reason that changes her character entirely off screen. There are fleeting moments when we get to see the Kimiko I care for, but they are few and far between because we have to make time for her saying things nobody should ever say, as they also drag things out for more unnecessary drama between her and Frenchie. Did we not just do a whole will they won't they season with her and Frenchie? The idea of them not being compatible as Kimiko learns to speak could have been something, but it is resolved way too easily, so there's no weight to it, as Kimiko and Frenchie are both resorted to being a couple for the season until they randomly need her to be a weapon to kill Homelander, and that is introduced way too suddenly, and that's just it for her. Which sucks, because if you told me last season Kimiko was going to be responsible for depowering Homelander, I would have been thrilled, and instead, it just kind of happens. I'm at least glad she got a happy ending and survived the show. I just wish there was more meaningful substance to her journey this season, which I've said about a lot of people, but Kimiko is the most upsetting one personally to me, as she feels completely wasted this season and turned into a plot device. Wasting someone of Karen Fukuhara's talents to say dumb jokes like that should be punishable by the death penalty. Alright, looks like Mother's Milk is next, so that's gonna be a quick one considering he barely gets anything meaningful to do this season. If you took a drink every time I said that, you'd probably be dead by now. It's a good idea for his arc to be becoming more like Butcher, but the entire thing is so incredibly undercooked as there's this rushed plotline with Sister Sage thrown in there, as she forces him to confront the fact that they're both monsters. I don't know, it's a really interesting idea, which sucks that it's so underdeveloped, because I like the idea of Butcher rubbing off on MM in all the wrong ways, and him finding his sense of light by the end of it all, but instead he just kind of randomly snaps out of it and all is back to being normal. I feel like you could have done something with maybe someone like Oh Father going after his family considering he knows they don't support Homelander, which would allow Mother's Milk a moment to directly protect them and prove he made the right choice staying on as one of the boys. Hey man, I don't know, I'm not a writer, but that's more than what they gave him this season. It's crazy to me that for all the screen time Soldier Boy hogged, MM didn't get a single interaction with him. Soldier Boy being immortal is what caused his crash out, and there's no payoff for that as Homelander takes Soldier Boy out before we can see anything interesting between those two. MM's hatred for Soldier Boy was his entire motivation in season 3. You're telling me you're not even gonna let him get a single lick in on him this time around? Oh man, I swear that Vought Rising stuff really ruined this show in every single possible way. There was not a single aspect of it that was untouched from its poison. I guess it could be worse. You could be Sister Sage, who is the single most wasted character this entire series. I cannot believe how much they fumbled her considering how cool she was last season. I love the idea that Homelander personally plucked her out of obscurity and she decided to join on and get him to be as powerful as possible just to see if she could. That was a great motivation for a character who's supposed to be the smartest in the universe, as she finally has something exciting to chew on, playing chess on the global stage. But now, in season 5, her motivation is just that she wants to cause World War soup so she can quietly read alone? What? Can she not just find a way to do that normally right now? She's the smartest person in the world. How can she not figure out a way to do that? It's a weird change this season, but whatever. I was hoping they could at least make the most of it and have her be interesting, as she was now taking an important role like 5 episodes episodes in, but instead, the smartest character in the world never gets any plans working this season. They make her so much dumber than she should be as a harrowing reminder that smart characters are only as smart as the people writing them. The idea that she makes a miscalculation because she fell in love with Godolkin in Gen V is really interesting. Unfortunately, they're so afraid to mention anything that happens in Gen V that they won't even mention Godolkin by name, so in the context of the boys, all of that stuff doesn't hit nearly as hard because they won't embrace it with open arms. And also, the craziest thing is, one of Sage's powers is empathetic accuracy. She should be able to read Soldier Boy's decisions and understand that he loved Stormfront, so of course he's bound to change sides again, especially with how many times he's done it this season. She should have seen it coming. So whatever, I understand you gotta get her to a point where she miscalculates. But then, she doesn't really do much after that for the rest of the season. She partially helps them turn Kimiko into a weapon that can depower Homelander, but we don't get to see any of that in a meaningful way, and then she just gets let off scot-free, even though she was the one who had the idea to do all of this in the first place, including Homelander camps. If you're gonna have her win this season, it should be because she outsmarted people, not because of an undercooked betrayal that causes her to lose her powers that she conveniently didn't want anymore. Sage should have been a special character as somebody pulling the strings behind everything. But instead, she is just written way too conveniently until the end when she basically gets a permanent lobotomy and then goes to Harry Potter World, which is a very funny correlation, but doesn't change the fact that they utterly wasted her this season. Then last, and most certainly the least, it's time to talk about the most disappointing part of this season. Yes, more than anything else I've said, which is crazy, but I cannot believe how little screen time the Gen V kids got. You're telling me that in this 8-hour-long season of television, you can only find 5 minutes for some of the most compelling characters in this universe? Who do you think you are? What is wrong with you people? It's not like season 2 of Gen V ended with this promise of those characters coming over to the boys and doing something important, or Kripke himself promising that Marie would play a big role in the final season. No, none of that happens. They just show up, get turned away, and then go to Canada. That was insulting as a big fan of Gen V. I think the most outrageous thing about their exclusion from this season is that my least favorite part of Gen V season 2 was the setup they did for the boys, and it was all for nothing. You had to shove all that Godolkin stuff in there with the virus and Sage, and it had no effect on this final season whatsoever. And in the grand scheme of things, both seasons of Gen V built Marie up to be someone who can go toe-to-toe with Homelander, and she doesn't even share the same room with him. The fact that both she and Homelander are the only two survivors of Project Odessa, and it's not even addressed in the boys whatsoever, is crazy to me. Instead, they just brush off the fact that she's as powerful as Homelander in a line that makes no sense considering what we saw in season 2 as she mastered her powers. But nope, apparently according to Annie's insane mischaracterization, the Gen V kids aren't allowed to join the resistance because she can't control her powers enough? Excuse me? What are we talking about? In-universe, there is a very easy way for her to disprove that, and they need all the help they can get, but outside of the universe, as a viewer of both shows, what was Gen V Season 2 about? Marie controlling her powers. Starlight sought her out that entire season and ended with the status quo of her recruiting them. Why is she turning them away now? The inconsistency in the writing between these two shows is so beyond frustrating. It also doesn't help that we only get to see 3 of those kids show up, being Marie, only the female version of Jordan, and Emma. You're not going to include Kate in anything outside of this one picture on the wall in a season where Homelander is gathering psychics? Or Sam, someone they definitely could have used to help fight Homelander? It feels like the writers got scared of how overpowered the Gen V kids were and purposefully wrote them out of the season so they didn't solve all their problems in 5 minutes. And if that's the case, maybe write some more compelling problems, guys. If you want to do things right, here's what I think they should have done. The Gen V kids should have been used as the boys' first plan to stop Homelander instead of wasting our time with the virus again. Having them all officially join the resistance as the boys use them as weapons, debating if that's even ethical or not, while they charge in to try and stop Homelander would have been so much more compelling and saved us of even more of this virus plot that goes nowhere interesting. I am so sorry to the Gen V kids that I was not your showrunner, because it is nasty how bad they do them this season. I would have much rather preferred they weren't here in the first place than have Starlight turn them away, then accept them, then turn them away again, then accept them, and then have them go to Canada. Can nobody make up their mind this season? What are we doing here? What's going on? I am exhausted of this show and talking about it and being so goddamn negative. I pride myself in my positivity and seeing the silver lining in things, looking for the good in the bad. But this season broke me. I think this is hands down the most negative video I have ever made, and that hurts me inside. I feel like I need to go take a cold shower after that. I wanted to like this season so bad. I wanted to fall in love with the boys all over again and watch them stick the landing, but they didn't. They spent 7 episodes doing things that made no sense up until a finale that should have been better than it it actually was because they didn't build up to it properly. But hey, at least Soldier Boy gets his spin-off next year. Isn't that just great? I don't know, man. This season was a big mess, and since the writers didn't want to do the work for a satisfying ending, I'm not going to either. The video ends here. I got more important things to do anyways. I gotta go play Lego Batman. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Now that's so much better. I'm just gonna be doing this for a while, so in the meantime, why don't you just let me know what you thought about the final season of The Boys? I would genuinely love to hear what everyone has to say and continue the conversation down below. And while you're at it, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. If you don't do it, I'm taking a crowbar straight to your head. I clearly have a lot of pent-up anger, so I'm not gonna be holding back, so you might as well just subscribe to save your brains.